Welcome to the Deep Dive from BookCast FM.
Bringing books to life one cast at a time.
Today we are really getting into a big one. Mariana Mazzucato's The Entrepreneurial State, the subtitle says it all, Debunking Public versus Private Sector Myths. So if you think innovation is all about the lone genius in a garage or maybe, venture capital, well, this book might just flip that script.
It absolutely aims to.
Our mission today, figure out who really lights the fire under technological progress. Is it the private sector hero we always hear about?
Or is there this often invisible public engine doing the heavy lifting?
That's the question.
And Mazzucato's core argument right out of the gate is that the government isn't just a regulator or a fixer of problems. It's actually the main creator and shaper of markets. It fundamentally challenges that whole narrative.
Wow, okay. That is a big claim. So before we dive into her argument, let's maybe set the stage. What's the standard story, the myth we're supposedly debunking?
Right. So the orthodox view, the one you usually get in Econ 101, is called the market failure theory.
Market failure theory.
Yeah. And basically, it sees the market as the primary engine for, well, everything. Growth, innovation, and the government. Its role is really limited. It should only step in when the market clearly fails.
Fails how? Like what?
Well, the classic examples are things like providing public goods, think streetlights or national defense, things the market won't provide on its own, or dealing with externalities like pollution, the costs that spill over, or maybe breaking up monopolies.
So the government is like the janitor, only shows up when there's a mess.
Kind of, yeah. Or maybe the mechanic, like you said before. It's seen as necessary sometimes, but fundamentally kind of timid, reactive.
Okay. And Mazzucato says it's just wrong,
Right.
or at least incomplete.
Dangerously limited is how she puts it, because it makes the state seem purely reactive. But her core point, her big critique, is that this completely misses how the state has historically acted. It ignores that almost all the really transformative technologies, things like the internet, biotech, even clean energy now, they were all actively created or shaped by the state long before the private sector was interested.
Why? Why wouldn't private companies jump on those?
Because private capital, especially venture capital, it generally hates deep, fundamental uncertainty. We're talking about research where the timelines are maybe decades long, the outcomes are totally unpredictable.
And there's no clear path to profit anytime soon.
Exactly. The risk of total failure is just enormous at that early stage. Private investors, naturally, they want a clearer line of sight to returns. They avoid that kind of foundational risk.
So the state steps into that void. It takes on the really big, scary risks.
Precisely. The state can afford to be patient. It can operate with what Mazzucato calls irreducible uncertainty. Public institutions, they can fund high-risk, potentially high-reward stuff because they're driven by a mission, national security, public health, not quarterly profits.
Okay, I see the logic. But doesn't that bring up the old criticism about government picking winners? Wasting taxpayer money on projects that go nowhere.
Yeah, that's the standard counter-argument for sure. And Mazzucato doesn't actually deny that failures happen. Of course they do. But she argues that strategic failure is almost a necessary part of the process for achieving big successes.
How so?
Well, the economies that really thrive are the ones where the state is willing to make these big strategic bets on future directions. Think about Silicon Valley itself. It's often portrayed as this purely free market miracle.
Right, deregulation, venture capital.
But the book argues it was fundamentally built on the back of decades of massive mission-driven U.S. government investment. Those were the strategic bets, DARPA, NIH. We'll get into those.
Okay.
But the problem this creates, and this is crucial, is what she calls the risk and reward imbalance.
Imbalance.
Meaning the public sector, the taxpayer, shoulders the enormous upfront risks, the fundamental research, the years of uncertainty. But then, once the technology is proven, once it's de-risked, the private sector often sweeps in and captures the vast majority of the financial rewards.
Right. The state plants the seeds and takes the early risks. The private companies harvest the fruit.
That's a good way to put it, yeah.
Okay, so that's the theory. Let's make it concrete. You mentioned the U.S. How does this entrepreneurial state actually look in practice there? I mean, the U.S. is often seen as the bastion of free enterprise.
And that's what makes the U.S. case so powerful in the book. Mazzucato argues the U.S. innovation engine was absolutely fueled by this very visible hand of the state, often through agencies tasked with big, ambitious missions.
Like DARPA. You mentioned them, Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency.
Exactly, DARPA. People hear defense and think weapons, but its mandate was incredibly broad. It was about tackling huge technological challenges for national security, defined very loosely. And out of that came funding for things like
Well,
ARPANET,
the internet.
the foundation of the internet, yes, and GPS technology,
Oh.
foundational computer networking, things that had massive civilian applications later on. DARPA operated with this really high-risk, tolerance, long-term view that private firms just couldn't match at the time.
Okay, DARPA's one. What else?
Then you've got the National Institutes of Health, the NIH.
Health research.
Massive. We're talking tens of billions of dollars every year poured into basic and applied life sciences research. That investment underpins the entire modern biotechnology and pharmaceutical industries. The groundwork for gene sequencing, new drug discovery platforms, a lot of that originates with NIH funding.
NASA, the space race.
Absolutely. NASA's push for the moon wasn't just about rockets. It drove huge leaps in computing, miniaturization, new materials, telecommunications. The technological spillovers from the Apollo program, for instance, were immense and benefited countless industries.
Okay, so these big agencies were making foundational investments.
Yeah.
But the example that really seems to land the point, the one everyone talks about from the book, is the iPhone.
Yes, the iPhone. It's sort of the ultimate case study.
Because everyone thinks Steve Jobs, Apple, design genius.
Right, and Apple's design and integration were genius, no question. But Mazzucato meticulously shows that almost every single core technology that makes an iPhone smart was actually funded by the U.S. government and taxpayers first.
Every single one. Like what specifically?
Okay, so the internet it connects to, DARPA, as we said, TPS, that was the U.S. Department of Defense, the touchscreen display technology. Early crucial developments came from research funded by the National Science Foundation, and interestingly, even the CIA's venture arm, In-Q-Tel.
Wow, even the CIA.
Yep, and maybe the most striking one, Siri, the voice assistant.
Where did Siri come from?
Siri originated from a massive, multi-year, DARPA-funded artificial intelligence project called CALO Cognitive Assistant that learns and organizes. It was a huge public bet on AI R&D.
That's incredible. You try pitching, let's spend millions for a decade on an AI assistant with no clear product yet to a VC in the, late 90s, early 2000s.
Exactly. It would have been laughed out of the room. The risk was astronomical from a commercial standpoint back then.
So Apple's brilliance was seeing how to put these pieces together.
Yes. Integration, design, user experience, marketing. They excelled at that. But they were assembling components, building on a technological foundation that was painstakingly laid down over decades, funded by public money, driven by public missions.
So the book's phrase is that entrepreneurs often surf the waves created by state investments.
That's it, precisely. It really reframes innovation not as this isolated act of private genius, but as a deeply collective process where the public sector often plays that crucial early risk-taking role.
And this isn't just like ancient history, right? The argument is this model still applies, maybe even more so now.
Absolutely. The book uses this historical analysis to look at the grand challenges we face today. Think about developing new vaccines and therapies.
Biotech.
Right, biotech. Or tackling climate change with the green transition. The argument is the state needs to be entrepreneurial again in these areas.
Okay, let's take biotech first. You mentioned the NIH funding the foundations.
Yeah, the NIH continues to pour billions into basic research that de-risks the science for the entire pharmaceutical industry. But this is where Mazzucato raises that sharp critique about the risk-reward imbalance again.
The paying twice problem.
Exactly. Taxpayers fund the incredibly expensive, high-risk foundational research through the NIH. Then, when a drug is developed based on that research, often using patents that were also publicly supported, taxpayers, or the healthcare system they fund, end up paying incredibly high prices for those same drugs. Think certain AIDS treatments or cancer therapies.
So public risk, private profit, and the public pays again at the pharmacy counter.
That's the asymmetry she points to. It raises real questions about fairness and how the rewards of public investment are distributed.
Okay, and then the Green Revolution. Tackling climate change.
Same pattern, she argues, but maybe even more critical now. The scale of investment needed to decarbonize economies, develop new energy sources, transform infrastructure. It's massive. The risks are huge, the timelines are long. It requires that same kind of patient, mission-oriented capital that the state uniquely provides.
Are there examples of this happening now?
We see pieces of it. Germany's Energiewende, their energy transition, involved huge state support. China's massive subsidies built their solar industry. And in the U.S., the Department of Energy, the DOE, has funded critical research and provided loans for clean energy startups.
Like Tesla. That's another big example in the book, right?
Yes, Tesla, often held up as the ultimate private sector disruptor.
But they got government help.
Significant help. Back in 2009, when they were still quite vulnerable, Tesla received a $465 million low-interest loan from the DOE's Advanced Technology Vehicles Manufacturing Program.
Yearly $500 million.
Yeah. And that wasn't just, pocket change. That loan was absolutely critical for them to scale up production of the Model S to build their factory. It helped them bridge that valley of death from promising startup to major automaker.
And this was built on
Decades of publicly funded R&D into battery technology, electric drivetrains, materials science. Again, much of it funded by agencies like the DOE itself. The state didn't just provide a loan, it had already funded much of the underlying science.
So the state absorbed risk at multiple levels, basic science, then later the crucial scale-up financing that private banks were hesitant about at the time.
Precisely.
Okay, so if this pattern holds, state takes the early massive risks, private sector commercializes, and often gets the lion's share of rewards. What's the solution? How do we fix this imbalance, this idea of socializing risks and privatizing rewards?
Right. This is where the book moves into policy prescriptions. Mazzucato argues strongly that the state needs to fundamentally change its mindset. It needs to stop acting like just a passive grant giver or lender of last resort.
And start acting more like
an actual investor, a strategic, active investor. If the public is taking the biggest risks, she argues, then the public should also get a direct share of the rewards when those bets pay off.
How would that work in practice? What kind of tools does she suggest?
Well, she outlines several concrete policy tools. One of the main ones is for the government to take equity stakes in companies that receive substantial targeted public funding.
So the government owns shares, like a venture capitalist would.
Sort of, yeah. Think about that Tesla loan. She argues the government could have and should have taken an equity stake in Tesla in return for that crucial risk-absorbing capital. That stake would now be worth billions, potentially.
And that money could then
be reinvested. It could create a revolving fund for future public innovation projects, supporting the next wave of risky but essential R&D. It makes the system more self-sustaining.
But wouldn't government ownership scare off private investors? Or lead to political interference in companies? That's the immediate pushback you'd hear.
She addresses that. The point isn't necessarily for the government to, run the company day to day. It could be non-voting shares or preference shares designed primarily to capture a fair financial return on the public's investment and ensure some accountability. It's about getting a return, not about control for control's sake.
Okay, equity stakes is one tool. What else?
Another key one is negotiating royalties and licensing fees. When public labs or university research funded by taxpayers leads to a commercially successful product, the public institution should get a direct financial return, a percentage flowing back.
Like a band getting royalties when their song is played.
Exactly. It ensures the source of the innovation sees some of the downstream benefit. And a third tool is conditional funding.
Meaning strings attached.
Basically, yes. Tying public grants, loans, or R&D support to specific societal goals or conditions. For example, if public money funds the development of a new drug, maybe there are conditions about ensuring affordable pricing or access. Or for green tech, conditions related to job creation or emissions reductions.
So using the funding not just to innovate, but to steer the outcomes of that innovation towards public benefit.
Precisely. It's about embedding public value right into the innovation process itself.
And all these tools, equity, royalties, conditions, they fit into this larger framework she calls mission-oriented innovation.
That's the big picture, yeah. It draws inspiration from things like the Apollo program, setting ambitious, society-wide goals or missions.
Like get to the moon by the end of the decade.
Right. But applying that same ambition and directionality to modern challenges, like achieve a 100% carbon neutral economy by 2050 or reverse the rise in dementia, the state defines the mission, creates the conditions, makes strategic investments across different sectors, and coordinates actors to pull in the same direction. It acts as a market shaper, actively creating and tilting the playing field towards that goal, not just fixing problems after they occur.
So it's a much more confident, ambitious role for the state in the economy.
Totally. It requires a fundamental narrative shift. We need to stop seeing the public sector primarily as, a drain on resources or just a clumsy regulator. Mazzucato argues we need to recognize and really value the state as a vital co-creator of economic value, as an active entrepreneurial partner.
Because without that shift in thinking,
Without it, public institutions will likely continue to be starved of the funds, the talent, and, crucially, the confidence they need to take on the really big long-term risks and challenges that the private sector, on its own, is often unwilling or unable to tackle.
it really crystallizes the argument. So the big takeaway for you, listening, is that innovation isn't just a private affair. It's deeply collaborative. It's often built on decades of courageous, patient public investment that paves the way, that de-risks the future. Maybe we need to rethink the story we tell ourselves about where progress comes from.
Yeah, moving beyond the myth of the lone inventor and recognizing the vital role of the collective, especially the public contribution. And that leads us to maybe a final thought to leave you with. If we accept that the state plays this crucial role as the investor of first resort, taking on the biggest risks for foundational progress, should our policies then focus less on simply rewarding the final private actors who commercialize the breakthroughs and more on designing systems that reinvest those rewards back into sustaining that collective, ambitious, risk-taking exploration for the future?
A fundamental question about who benefits and how we fuel the next wave of innovation. It's a lot to think about. If this deep dive has sparked your interest, we definitely encourage you to support the author. Grab a copy of The Entrepreneurial State. We'll put a link in the description.
It's a really thought-provoking read.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us today. This has been BookCast FM.
Bringing books to life one cast at a time.